Welcome everyone once again to May's OSPOlogy session. Today's session is going to be about third-party outbound OSPOs. And for this special occasion, we have Josep Prat from Aiven. But before starting, we are going to share some OSPO news. As I already shared in the chat, you have the link to the OSPO discussion. Next week, we have an OSPO Birds of a Feather and Happy Hour at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con Europe. And that's gonna happen in Valencia. For me, it's like super near, like it's just like 3 hours drive. So that is awesome. We already have like 60 registrants. So, and I think like the space is limited. We have like maybe 70. So if you're planning to attend, I really recommend to go and receive just in case. Also, for those who are planning to go to Open Source Summit in North America, OSPOcon schedule is now live and the speakers and sessions has been announced, so you can go there and check. We also have a call for papers open for Open OSPOcon Europe and OSPOcon Japan. OSPOcon Europe, you will have until May 30, so less than 1 month to go. Today, we announced that during both open source summits and OSPOcon in North America and in Europe, we're gonna have a OSPO Awards ceremony. And today we just opened for the nomination form. We launched a new OSPO case study. This comes from PORS, and it basically explains why they created the OSPO and the main goal of their OSPO, as well as some OSPO goals, how they there started, and the main OSPO structure. You can also go to tudogroup.org/guides, and there you will see the full article of this case study. Also, this month we have 2 new OSPO discussions in the OSPO forum. Big thanks to our Tudo members, the ones that support Tudo and fuel Tudo. So thank you so much for the new members that has just joined. Now let's move very quickly to a contribution section. Tudo Group is open to contributors. One of the cool activities we're doing to ease contributors is the workdays. We have AMER and APAC workdays, and also for America time zones workdays. So if you're interested, you can go to tudogroup.org/community, where you will find the to-do calendar, and you can go to the Zoom link and join and say hi. Just to remember that everyone that has an OSPO or is involved in OSPO or similar open source initiatives is more than welcome to present here. Same as Josep is doing today, you can be one of the guests for the next OSPOlogy session. And last but not least, if you don't want to miss a thing of what is going on in the OSPOverse, every month we launch OSPO News. And it's a newsletter that has been built by the community and for the community. So you can subscribe and even contribute to the newsletter that we have it in the to-do repos. That's the end of OSPO News. Let's now move to the topic of the month. Today we have Josep Prat from Aiven. Josep Prat is the open source manager at Aiven, and he's gonna talk about third-party outbound OSPOs.
Thank you, Anna, for the introduction. And as she was mentioning, one of the things that the OSPOlogy sessions are about is about learning. One of the reasons to do an OSPOlogy session is to share the learnings of building an OSPO, and that's the case. And I want to share the history behind how Aiven created the OSPO and the slight different take on how to do an OSPO. So the outline of this talk is basically 4 main topics. It's basically explaining what is this extrospective OSPO, and we made up that word in our team to just define or to characterize how could we define the type of OSPOs we do. I will explain the objectives of our OSPO, the lessons we learned, and why I do believe that more companies should follow the same path and do OSPOs in a similar fashion. Extrospective OSPOs. It's really a mouthful, and it's kind of playing words with introspective and going extrospective, to the outside. So we know the difference between inbound and outbound. So, like inbound OSPOs are the ones that they take care of the open source projects that come into the organization. They need to make sure that they are compliant. They want to check licensing, security of those, all that work and the inbound OSPOs. We know those ones. And these are one type of OSPOs. There is the outbound OSPOs, which they focus and concentrate on producing open source. And traditionally, the outbound OSPOs were around or surrounding one open source project of the company. So I have a successful open source project and I create an OSPO around it to promote it and to create a community around it. Of course, it's not just inbound or outbound, and you're either one or the other one. It's everything is a mix, and everyone is inbound and outbound. And it's only like a matter of where is your stress. So today I want to go deeper into the outbound ones because Aiven OSPO should be characterized as an outbound one. Usually, and again, every OSPO is different, but usually outbounds are usually around policies around creating open source software. They promote the notion of this own open source software. So I have our company creates new open source software and it's successful. It's used by other companies or other people, and we want that usage to strive, and we want even to increase it and to make it easier for other ones to use. OSPOs in that area need to talk and discuss things about governance, and they need to have deep discussions on how and what's the best way to do governance on open source projects. And obviously, it's concentrating on code production. So we need to produce those open source projects that we own and we want to advertise and we want to promote and we want to enhance. What if the projects that the OSPO contributes to belong to a third-party organization? So it's not anymore our own open source projects, but basically open source projects that belong to different foundations, or they belong to even different companies. That's basically what we do at Aiven, and I want you to meet Aiven's OSPO. So we contribute to projects like Apache Kafka, Apache Flink, Postgres. Funny fact, the Postgres community doesn't have a logo with name underneath or on the side. It just has logo or logo with text and slogan, which is huge. Or OpenSearch, for example, and many more to come. So that's the focus that we have on the Aiven's OSPO. We concentrate on producing code for those projects. Obviously, those projects do not belong to Aiven. And as you can read below, all those projects are trademarks of the respective owners. We are not owning those projects, but basically all the team members contribute towards those ones. So I want to share some facts about it. We are around 10 people. We are organized in chapters, and by chapter, we mean a project. So I mentioned before, we have people contributing to Kafka, people contributing to Flink, to Postgres, to OpenSearch. Each of those is a chapter. So then we try to have 2 people on each chapter, so they are not alone and they can discuss things and they can do some common joined discussions or building features on such projects. We are highly distributed, so we have people that are in West Coast US, Canada, and kind of eastern coast, not exactly on the eastern, but basically Toronto, Montreal area. We have people in France, we have people in Czech Republic, we have people in Germany. So we are quite distributed, and obviously everything happens on the internet, as basically the open source happens also on the internet, and there is no time zone for open source. And we are in a growing phase. So it's not that we have that's not our final form, if you be thinking like Pokemon style or anything like that. So it's not our final evolution. We want to grow more, and we need to hire way more people. So by the way, we are hiring. So if you're ever interested in those things, just get in touch. We want to double the size of the OSPO, and we want to reach to more projects. We want to reach and deepen the projects that we already have an impact on. And we just turned 1 year old. Just at the beginning of this month, basically, it's a moment that we had more than one single person on the OSPO that we could consider it as a team. So that was when we turned 1 year old as a team. I want to also share the principles we run with. So we try to put community first. And with that one, we mean that the Aiven's agenda or tasks, they are not taken at a higher or different way than the community issues or priorities. So every time a developer who needs to work on one of those projects, they go and look at the community needs and they pick what's the most effective thing for them to work at that point in time that will have a bigger impact to the community itself. We want to be recognized, but not as in like individually recognized or like in this way, but we want to be like seen as a company, a group of people that do help and do support open source communities, and that we do not have any secret hidden agenda. We just are there to help and to support the open source projects that we care about. We want to be transparent as well. So we don't want to hide the fact that we are working at Aiven and we are being paid at Aiven to work on those projects. That's transparent. We don't want to hide the fact that we do these things. Also, we don't want to hide the fact that when we work on tasks is because we find legitimate interest on those tasks and not just because we want to push some hidden thing. So that's one of the things that we want to be like, we want to focus on. And obviously, it's more than just production of code. So usually when people think about contributing to upstream or to open source projects, we think about creating new features. But we also talk about sharing the knowledge of such projects, spreading the news and sharing best practices. Also reviewing PRs. That's one of the biggest problems right now on many open source projects is there are a ton of PRs to be reviewed and we need help there. And that's one of the things that also we try to help, and we try to offer our support to help reviewing those open PRs. So it should be easy for the maintainers. Consequences. So basically, that's the nice thing. So that's what we try to do. How is it different from other type of OSPOs or even other type of organizations? So the first thing that probably raises some questions onto your legal team when you start proposing those things is the IP, the intellectual property of the code that is produced by the team members is basically not owned by the company, but by others. So either be a foundation or another company who might be, by the way, a competitor. But that's not relevant on the case of contributing to open source. We are believing in the projects and we contribute to the projects, no matter who has the IP of those projects. We have little to no control over the backlog. So yes, we can create new issues. Yes, we can decide to work on what we want, but obviously in the end, it's the community who decides what gets in and what gets not in the new release or what gets merged. Of course, each project is organized in a different way, so that differs from project to project. And if we go to some Apache projects, it's a PMC. If we talk about Postgres, it's about the committers, and you just need to convince one committer that that feature is interesting and useful, and then they would commit that one. But basically, you need to convince somebody else. And of course, yeah, you can have committers in your team, but it's not probably a best practice to just merge everything that your colleague just produces. So again, there is little to no control over the backlog or basically what's going to be ending up on the project. Again, the same thing with timings. The fact that we define OKRs or any kind of measurements on performances, the timing, it's only us that we care about that one. If we say in 3 months we want X, Y, Z, that's only relevant to us. The rest of the community doesn't even know those random arbitrary 3 months that we just decided to put a timer on. It's completely irrelevant. And as I hinted before, it basically means that you might need to collaborate with competitors. You might need to join efforts with people that in theory you should be competing with or the companies are competing with. When we go down to the OSPOs, this competition is kind of gone, or let's say it should be gone, and we are just joining our efforts to create a better project and a bigger one. So what are the objectives of this kind of open source program offices, like these extrospective open source offices or third-party outbound? So I want to have one reflection on why those projects are needed, so why it's interesting and relevant. So given this server architecture, which is just to illustrate the point, we have a shop web server and a pricing service and a stock service. Could you consider it a risk if one of these modules was maintained by your developers in their free time? I guess the answer is absolutely. Yeah, it would be a risk. How can we do these things? So how we leave the pricing service unmaintained and just on the goodwill of the developers that can do things on their free time? I guess everyone agrees on that sentence. So then my question is, then why are we accepting it when it comes to open source? When one of those projects suddenly is an open source project, many companies are completely fine by saying, yeah, well, but that's maintained by the community. but it's a critical part of the infrastructure of many, many companies. Companies cannot claim anymore, we don't use open source. Everyone uses open source. And in many, many, many cases, it's a crucial part of your infrastructure. Without them, your company or your projects do not work anymore. So why are we leaving this thing unmaintained or just in the goodwill of developers? So that's what we want to change. Basically, these kind of OSPOs want to change it, and they want to have critical infrastructure actively maintained. So we want to dedicate people the same way they dedicate people to the pricing service. We want to dedicate people to these open source projects that we depend on and we rely on. We want to have a pool of people who are always ready and willing to contribute to those projects. We want to, by doing these things, also we want to make sure that those projects do not depend on one single company sponsoring those people, or like basically de facto being all these open source projects being de facto controlled or de facto like organized by one single company. If we have more OSPOs that behave like that, we will probably achieve some kind of diversity in terms of affiliation on people's contributors on projects. So that's probably a good thing to do as well. Like we want to create more diverse affiliations on contributors for open source projects. Again, similar to the same thing, if we have different affiliation of people, if we people that contribute to projects work on different areas, different industries, and they have different focuses, they will bring different opinions, they will bring different approaches to solving problems. And we all know that when we have these different approaches and we discuss and we try to achieve a common ground solution, solutions are richer. So by doing those things, we will reach probably to a richer solutions and better solutions. And we want to relieve the workload of the current maintainers. And of course, that means that we want to be helpful to them for them. We want to maybe, if we can, be maintainers as well and try to help support the burden. But again, we want to do the tasks that maybe nobody else can do. Maybe the ones who do it on their free time, they want to have challenging tasks or tasks that motivates them. Now, by having these kind of OSPOs, we have the time and the effort and the opportunity to dedicate some time to work on tasks that maybe nobody else wants to work. So the mission of these kind of OSPOs could be basically said like that. I mean, that's kind of a rephrasing of our own mission. So you can just, if you want to create an OSPO like that, you can just reuse this one or tune this one to fit your better idiosyncrasy of your company. But we want to ensure the sustainability and secure the future of the open source software infrastructure used by the company. So that's one of the critical things. So we want to do risk mitigation on the infrastructure we have on open source. By that, we will increase the knowledge on such projects, and we might even be able to drive the projects to places that we deem and we think that might be interesting. And by collaborating with other ones, make those projects better. I'm jumping now to the lessons that we learned during this first year. As I mentioned, like we just turned 1 year. So with OSPOs, you need time to try things and to see if those things work. So I want to share some of the lessons that we learned during this journey. The first one is on hiring, and it seemed to be like one of the most complicated things. The pool is way smaller than you think. So if I'm talking now about what's the ideal candidate, for many product development, you have several thousands of developers in the world that would fit that ideal candidate profile. This persona that you can imagine, that's my ideal developer. There are several thousand people probably that fit that role. If we now think about, I want a committer on Kafka or a committer in Flink, suddenly that ideal persona, it's probably only 30 people in the world. So suddenly your pool is now reduced. It's really, really small. So the question is, for example, how many committers are there on the project that you're looking right now? So that's the ideal candidate. Of course, we don't mean that we only hire those people, but if we try to say like, what's my ideal candidate? If I have a wish list, if I have a magic wand that I can just make wishes come true, my pool of ideal candidates is really, really small. I can try to look for people that would be like really great and really good, probably like who are contributors or regular contributors on projects. There are projects that they are really healthy and there are plenty of contributors, and some other projects do not have that healthiness, and finding those people is hard. So look at your projects that you want to contribute to and start hiring way before than you might think, because it takes time, and finding the right people takes time. And a consequence of that one, which I guess comes without saying, is that you need to hire the talent wherever they are. So the talent in this particular case, it's cars, and if they are located in a complete different time zone than yours, so be it. We need to basically hire the talent where they are and not expect them to come, or just hire the local talent that is there. So if we want to succeed in those ones, we need to hire the talent when they are. So you need to go remote, and hello, multiple time zones, because that will be your reality. One thing that we try, and it kind of works, and we need to see if it works better and in a long-term planning, is create programs that promote open source software contributions internally. So at Aiven, we have something called Plant and Program, which basically turns open source contributions into money. Explain it slightly deeper. It's basically the employees that Aiven want to contribute on open source projects on their free time. Aiven contributes back to them by paying them X amount of money per hour spent on open source projects. And that's a really great way to get this exposure and this pool of developers who really enjoy working on open source projects, or they try working on open source projects and they like it, and then we can probably create a better pool for hiring and growing people, instead of just hiring the top talent from all the places. Another thing we learned is developer traits. And the developers we need to hire, they should not focus anymore on quick turnarounds. And what I mean by that is code release, observe, and then I fix something, and then I release again. So many people do have this thing ingrained, and it's a really great trait for a developer. Product developer, it's great. So I develop something, I release it maybe several times a day. I observe if the change I produced produces the right result. So if not, I fix this thing and I release again, and the cycle starts again. So that's the thing that many developers are focusing on. Unfortunately, this thing doesn't translate that well when we work with third-party open source projects. That's not the thing that we optimize. We need to sometimes work on pull requests that will be open for a long time. And actually, until we be able to observe and get the feedback, it might take several weeks or months, because this product needs to be released, needs to be used, and then you can start applying the extra fixes. But basically, that kind of way of working is not the same. It doesn't translate directly. Another one, developers that, at least that's what we've seen, it's better if they are self-driven. And by that, we mean that they should know how to prioritize their work. There will be no manager that manages like 5-6 different people working on different projects that understands exact needs of each community that the people reporting to them are having at the moment. So developers working on those chapters are the ones who need to understand and know what are the things they should be focusing on. And they are their own product owners. That brings a lot of joy and a lot of freedom, but it also is a big responsibility, because you need to be deciding what to work on next. Related to this one, in order to pick the best tasks to work, we need people who can understand the community needs, and they need to read the community and find, okay, that's the best thing that I should be focusing right now. That's the best tasks to be focusing on, and they will be returning the biggest benefit for the whole community. Resiliency, and I guess everyone who worked on open source knows that sometimes it can be hard to be working up there. And lots of proposed changes will be rejected, and it's not always because the solution was not good enough. Sometimes it's because of, sometimes it might even be political reasons. Sometimes it's because not now, maybe in the future. We don't want this feature at the moment. So you need to be more resilient probably than by working on a product team or the pool of developers that we usually come across, which are concentrated on developing features for users. You need a different type of resiliency. They need one resiliency type, we need another one. Another thing we learned is the management style. You cannot manage the same way developers that work on product teams or that work on this type of OSPOs. The areas of impact are limited. And I was mentioning that before, the timing, the responsibilities, all these things suddenly are external. So one of the tool sets or tools in your belt when you're a manager in a product team sometimes is, okay, we do have a lot of PRs that are not being merged if you work in with PRs. So one of the things to solve that one is put more people reviewing those PRs. Of course, that thing doesn't really work on open source. Again, it's the community who decides when things are getting in or not. So lots of the impact that you can have as a manager is suddenly gone. You are not the expert in the room. And by that one, I don't mean that you should never be you should never be the expert in the room. I'm not meaning that, but basically the people that are reporting to you are the experts on their own areas. And what you need to do as a manager is orchestrate those and make them work efficiently. But you are not the one knowing the most about each of their niche areas. They are the experts. And I want to say that that's probably, you're not like like a normal football coach that it's visible and everybody knows. It's probably more like in American football, the attack coach that probably nobody knows and you only know if you're really a fan of it, that decides and puts people in the right places and define them what should be the best way to attack. But in the end, it's the people who do the work, and they are the ones who decide on the field what's the best strategy to follow. They are just making them, they're enabling them, and they are providing them with enough resources that they can pick the best solution at that moment in time. So again, you are an enabler from the sideline. You need to make them do the best of what they can produce. One of the last things that we also learned was performance metrics and how to evaluate if I'm doing a good job. So when I joined Aiven, I joined originally as an individual contributor. So I was joining to work on the Kafka, and at the end I shifted to a more management position. But one of the questions I asked during my interview was, and how do we measure if we're doing a good job on this position? The answer was, we don't know yet, but we're willing to work on discovering it. So that was one of the first things that I did, and try to find out what can we measure. So again, it comes back to the same thing. You don't control a substantial part of the process. So the things we measure, they should be only the things that depend on you. Otherwise, we're putting a lot of externalities on this measurement. So it means that maybe I may be impacted by third-party people on measuring my performance. So merges, releases, reviews, all those ones depend not only on us, they depend on the community itself. So probably we need to try to measure something that does not count those. Internal time scales are arbitrary. So again, if I say in the next 3 months, I want to have these 3 features out, that might work as in for internal development, for projects that you control the whole governance of it. But when you don't control the governance of it, that kind of goes away. So what we came up with, and feel free to take it if you think those are useful, we defined 3 different metrics. The first one is the number of issues worked on. And I know it sounds really fluffy, but it's basically the things that we put some effort and we try to apply a solution for it. Doesn't mean they need to be merged. It doesn't need they need to be released or even reviewed, because that thing we cannot control the time. Over time, we can measure those things. Like given infinite time, we can just ignore time, right? So then we can define the other ones. We can just see how many of the proposed changes made it. But if we want to define with a finite amount of time, then we remove that one, and then that's what it's left to us. Another thing we want to basically measure the performance of the people working in the OSPO is by number of patches reviewed. And that one is solely depending on us. So we can just review more or less pull requests or patches submitted on the mailing list. And that's something we want to encourage, and we want to raise the numbers on reviews. And then something called community engagement, which is basically how many blog posts, mailing list activity, talks you are doing. So how much you are sharing the knowledge of such projects. I want to finish the talk now with giving a word on why does it matter. So why I do believe, and I really do believe sincerely, that more companies should follow some more of these extrospective OSPOs. So it's more than money, and monetary donations, don't get me wrong, they are awesome, and we need to donate more money to the to the projects, and we need to put more money on the project's tables. That's a fact. However, most of the times the maintenance on those projects is not just solved by money, it's also solved by helping people, putting people in the project to help and to support the current maintainers. So it's not just only about the money, we also need people who work on those projects. And we believe that that's a scalable solution in the sense that the more retrospective OSPOs, the more open source developers mass, meaning the more secure the projects will be. And I don't mean that if we have more retrospective OSPOs, then there will be no next Log4j incident or anything like that. Incidents will happen, and that's a given. It's only the fact of how quickly we can react on those and we can recover from those. The more people we have working on projects, covering all the crucial projects on the open source world, the faster we will be recovering. So one last word on these ones, like everyone should have one. So basically, am I saying every company should have an retrospective OSPO? The answer is no. I don't believe everyone should have one, but basically everyone who could afford it probably should have one. And I want to emphasize the could afford it. I mean, again, it's quite an effort to put a team like that. And again, it's probably not for early time startups, but whenever you reach certain mass and you consume open source software, probably companies should start thinking, shall I formalize the contribution back to those projects? And call to action for today is let's build shared open source projects together. If you want more further information, these are the links. The slides are available for you. And thank you very much for attending. That's the QR code that will bring you to these slides. Thank you very much.